Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in the occupied Kashmir, raising the toll to over a dozen this month. The occupation forces targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation in the Amshipura area of Shopaian district. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communication blackout for the past 348 days. In the US, civil rights leader from the 1960s movement, John Lewis, has died at the age of 80 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. A protege of Martin Luther King Jr., Lewis was elected in 1985 as a Democrat to the US House of Representatives from Georgia. Lewis was a victim of police brutalities and suffered a skull fracture in March 1965's infamous Bloody Sunday. The European Union has offered a revised plan for the bloc's proposed economic recovery fund from 750 billion euros to 450 billion euros. Council President Charles Michel presented the plan on the second day of the summit in Brussels. Diplomats said the proposal will also increase rebates on the core EU budget for Austria, Denmark and Sweden. The global number of COVID-19 cases has exceeded 14 million, while the death toll has crossed 600,000. This comes as the US has recorded over 77,000 infections in the past day, raising the toll to over 3.6 million with 139,000 deaths. Meanwhile, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says 25 million people have been infected with the virus and another 35 million are at a risk of acquiring it. The country has so far recorded nearly 14,000 deaths. In Pakistan, 47 people lost their lives overnight, raising the total to 5,522 with nearly 262,000 cases. In cricket, the rain has delayed the resumption of West Indies' first innings of the second match against England at Manchester's Old Trafford. The Islanders are at 32 runs at the loss of 1 wicket, while England declared their innings at 469 runs. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in the occupied Kashmir, raising the toll to over a dozen this month. The occupation forces targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation in the Amshipura area of Shopaian district. Indian troops have killed 7 Kashmiris within 24 hours, violating human rights in the valley. Earlier, 4 youths were martyred in Kulgam and Kupwara districts. Pakistan has repeatedly urged the international community to take action against Indian brutalities in Kashmir. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communication blackout for the past 348 days. The UN has slammed India over its prosecution of Kashmiri journalists, saying it is a patron of silencing independent reporting on the situation in the occupied valley. In a report, UN Special Rapporteur said New Delhi is using criminal sanctions to silence journalists on the brutality of Indian troops in the valley. The report said 4 Kashmiri journalists over the past 5 months have been booked under an anti-terror law. The rapporteur said penalization of a journalist solely for being critical of the government is a violation of international human rights law. They said the broad scope of the laws under which the journalists have been charged made them easily amenable to abuse. The UN reminded India of its obligations to respect and ensure the right to freedom of expression under the international law. The Pakistan Army says Indian troops have wounded 2 women in unprovoked fighting along the line of control. In a tweet, the military's media wing said the Indian troops targeted civilians in the Rakchakri and Baro sectors along the LOC. It said Indian troops have committed nearly 1,700 ceasefire violations this year so far. Islamabad has repeatedly asked New Delhi to respect 2003 ceasefire agreement between the two countries. The Taliban claim they have killed 10 Afghan soldiers in 2 different attacks in northern Kunduz city. In a tweet, a spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said 8 troops were killed in Zakhil, while 2 others in Zakhilo area of Kunduz. He said a pistol, a rocket launcher, 2 rifles and 4 light weapons were also recovered. He accused the Afghan soldiers of targeting and killing civilians. Kabul has not commented on the claim yet. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's Ministry of Defense says it has killed 6 Taliban in a counter-operation in Faizabad district of Jozjan. The global number of COVID-19 cases has exceeded 14 million, while the death toll has crossed 600,000. This comes as the US posted another record cases with over 77,000 people testing positive in the past day. The total number of infections in the country has topped 3.6 million with over 139,000 deaths. In Brazil, 1,163 people have died overnight, increasing the toll to nearly 77,000. Details in this report.
The World Health Organization has reported a record single-day increase in global coronavirus cases. The biggest increase are from US, Brazil, India, and South Africa. Despite a spike in cases, US President Donald Trump has ruled out a national mandate requiring people to wear face masks. But California's governor has issued guidance that schools can start in-person instruction if they are off the state's monitoring list for 14 days. He said all schools will require masking, social distancing, and regular testing.
The one thing we have the power to do to get our kids back into school is look at this list again. Wear a mask, physically distance, wash your hands, minimize the mixing. The more we do on this list, and we do it at scale, the quicker all those counties are going to come off that monitoring list. We're going to mitigate the spread of this virus, and those kids are back in school.
Australia has cancelled the next 2-week sitting of the parliament, saying there is a significant risk of virus spread. Azerbaijan has extended lockdown restrictions, including the closure of its borders until August 31st, after a further rise in the number of infections. Authorities in Spain have urged the residents to stay home and not gather in groups of more than 10 as they try to curb a rise in coronavirus cases.
The residents of all these municipalities should stay home if going out is not essential. This is the request we make. Stopping the virus from running out of control depends on all of us. We recommend that you follow this measure and that you do not go to your second homes this weekend.
Doctors at India's largest hospital treating coronavirus patients say they are prepared for a second wave of the virus. China has reported 22 new COVID-19 cases on the mainland, of which 16 are domestically transmitted in the far western region of Xinjiang. Authorities in Xinjiang have reduced subways, buses, and taxis and closed off some residential communities. South Korea's new virus cases have fallen back to 38, but authorities are keeping their guards up as cluster infections continue to put a strain on their efforts to contain the virus.
Well, Pakistan has reported a record single-day recoveries from COVID-19 with over 14,000 people testing negative. The health ministry said over 198,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said there are nearly 58,000 active cases in the country, among which 1,604 are critical. It said the death toll in the country has risen overnight by 47 to 5,522. The ministry said nearly 2,000 cases were reported in the last 24 hours, increasing the tally to nearly 262,000. Sindh is the worst hit province with over 111,000 infections, while Punjab has reported over 89,000 cases. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says 25 million citizens have been infected with the coronavirus and another 35 million are at risk of acquiring it. In a speech, Rouhani said nearly 14,000 Iranians have lost their lives so far due to the disease. He said over 200,000 people have been hospitalized and the number can double in the coming months. Iranian Health Ministry has reported 188 deaths in the last 24 hours. With a population of 80 million, Iran has been the hardest hit country in the Middle East. Well, China and Russia's foreign ministers have voiced support against US unilateralism and agreed to enhance bilateral cooperation. In a phone call with Russia's Sergei Lavrov, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Washington is reviving a Cold War mentality in its policy towards Beijing. Wang said Beijing will not be misled by a small number of anti-China forces in the United States. He said China and Russia should stand by all the countries to reject any actions destructive to international order. Meanwhile, Lavrov said Moscow opposes unilateralism in international affairs. He said Washington has always believed in the American exceptionalism and egotism. U.S. federal agents are cracking down on protesters in Oregon under President Donald Trump's executive order to protect monuments. U.S. Customs and Border Protection spokesperson said agents have been deployed to Portland to support the Department of Homeland Security unit. Officers shoved away medics trying to help a bleeding protester, while several demonstrators were bundled into unmarked vehicles. Oregon Governor Keith Brown called the incident a blatant abuse of power by the federal government, branding it Trump's political theater. Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler said the Marshal's Service will conduct a full investigation into the alleged use of a weapon. Thousands of Portlanders have been holding daily protests against police brutality outside the federal courthouse since the custodial death of George Floyd. In the U.S., civil rights leader from the 1960s movement, John Lewis, has died at the age of 80 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. A protege of Martin Luther King Jr., Lewis was elected in 1986 as a Democrat to the U.S. House of Representatives from Georgia.
During 1961's anti-segregation bus tours called Freedom Rides, racist mobs beat Lewis in South Carolina and Alabama. In an interview in 2004, recalling these acts of the violence, he said none of those incidents made him question the philosophy of nonviolence. Lewis was one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and then served as its chairman from 1963 to 1966. He co-organized and spoke at the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his historic I Have a Dream speech. The Democrat was one of the big six civil rights leaders and the last surviving speaker from the era-defining march. He was a victim of police brutalities and suffered a skull fracture in March 1965's infamous Bloody Sunday. In December 2019, Lewis announced he has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Former US President Barack Obama awarded Lewis the Medal of Freedom in 2011, paid tribute to the civil rights leader. Obama said Lewis gave all of himself to the cause of freedom and justice and inspired generations to try to live up to his example.
Tens of thousands of protesters have flooded the streets of Mali demanding President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to resign. The anti-government movement has asked for the parliament to be dissolved and called for a republican transition from the current government. A delegation from the 15-nation West African regional bloc is trying to calm the political tensions in Mali. The protesters say President Keïta has failed in tackling the dire economy and Mali's 8-year militant conflict. 11 people have died and 158 have been injured in the demonstrations so far that began on 5th June. The EU has expressed concern over the growing use of sanctions by the US against European companies and interests. In a statement, Bloc's Foreign Minister Joseph Borrell said Washington's measures go against international laws. Borrell said he has witnessed the rise in curbs in cases of Iran, Cuba, the International Criminal Court, and most recently the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream projects. He said European policies should be determined in Europe and not by third countries. Borrell said that EU is always open to a dialogue, but this cannot take place against the threat of sanctions. Earlier, Germany and Russia rejected US latest threat of sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. EU leaders will meet again today to try to save a post-coronavirus economic rescue plan after running into opposition from the Dutch bloc. The 27 European leaders are negotiating a 750 billion euro stimulus package that will help lift countries hardest hit by the pandemic. Yesterday, the leaders met one-on-one for the first time since February in an empty European Council building. But they failed to reach an agreement after 12 hours of difficult haggling. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte refused to give ground on his demand for strict controls on payments to his southern partners. Fire has engulfed the 15th century cathedral in the western French city of Nantes. This comes just over a year after a major fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris destroyed its main spire. In a statement, a local fire service said hundreds of firefighters are battling to put out the blaze. It said they are working to find out the cause of the fire. The cathedral has been damaged earlier as well when in 1972 a fire completely ravaged its roof. A Russian pharmaceutical company, or firm, has signed a deal to release the Oxford vaccine against the new coronavirus. The agreement will allow Russia to produce the vaccine developed by British-Swedish AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford. Speaking to reporters, our firm's chairman, Alexei Repik, said the company plans to supply the drug to 50 countries. Russia's investment fund had said our firm will be one of the co-producers of Oxford vaccine in the world.
AstraZeneca signed an agreement on production of Oxford vaccine with one of our portfolio companies, Air Farm. So basically, we don't need to take anything from the UK. Everything is given to Air Farm by AstraZeneca, and AstraZeneca will be one of the core producers of Oxford vaccine in the world.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. SpaceX Crew Dragon Endeavour spacecraft is scheduled to return on 1st of August from the International Space Station. In a statement, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said the splashdown is scheduled for 2nd of August. Crew Dragon spacecraft with Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken on board successfully docked to the International Space Station on 31st of May. Falcon 9 launch vehicle was successfully launched on May the 30th from the spaceport at Cape Canaveral, Florida. This launch marks the U.S. first manned flight in 9 years from American soil. In China, 6 people have been killed in landslides caused by torrential rains in southwest Chongqing municipality. Rescue services said heavy downpours in Guizhou district caused multiple landslides and road collapses. 2 people died and another 4 went missing in the landslides initially. Rescue workers found all the bodies later, bringing the death toll to 6. The Ministry of Emergency Management says floods have affected at least 20 million residents in 24 provincial level regions across China since the start of July. In Bangladesh, the death toll due to the floods has risen to 55 after 5 more died in the last 24 hours. Monsoon rains and onrush of river waters from upstream India have been ravaging the country for 21 days. Authorities say 11 rivers overflowed their danger marks in 13 districts and washed off hundreds of houses. The government said 18 of the country's 64 districts have been affected, with at least 3,000 people being injured in the worst hit northern regions. Earlier, the Disaster Management and Relief Minister Inamur Rahman said nearly 2.25 million people were affected by the flooding. A Syrian artist finds solace in making mosaics of prison memories, not to forget Bashar al-Assad regime tortures in Aleppo's Aziz district. More in this report.
Mosaic artist Abdul Razak Tawal remained in prison for 6 years in Damascus. He has started reflecting the torture memories with mosaic stones. Tawal has everything in his mind, like the moments of interrogation, friends, and torture.
I saved everything in my mind, like moments of interrogation, friends, and torture. Now I paint everything I remember. I also picture prisoners who died under torture.
نسترجع ذكريات.
Only a small number of victims dare to share their experiences after being released. Tevel got his freedom from prison in June 2019. He says he paints everything he remembers, even the pictures of those prisoners who died due to torture.
كان يعذبني.
I made a portrait of the cruel that tortured me so much that I couldn't have a child and caused my 2 friends dead. I can't take out of my mind the picture of him wearing glasses on his face and having a cigar in his mouth, as well as I can't forget his torture.
ملامحه تماما يعني.
According to rights organizations, hundreds of thousands are currently held in the prisons and interrogation centers of Assad regime.
The European Union has offered a revised plan for the bloc's proposed economic recovery fund from 750 billion euros to 450 billion euros. Council President Charles Michel presented the plan on the second day of the summit in Brussels. Diplomats said the proposal will also increase rebates on the core EU budget for Austria, Denmark and Sweden. A Dutch envoy said Michel's proposed plan is a serious step in the right direction. Earlier, EU President had proposed 750 billion euros and Germany and France had proposed an amount of 500 billion euros. In cricket, the rain has delayed the resumption of West Indies' first innings at a loss of 1 wicket. Earlier, England declared the innings at 469 runs. Ben Stokes and Dom Sibley completed centuries to move hosts into a dominant position. Roston Chase picked 5 wickets, while Kemar Roach picked 2 for West Indies. In football, West Ham United beat Watford by 3-1 at the London Stadium to all but guarantee their Premier League survival. The Hammers now have 37 points, 6 more than Bournemouth and Aston Villa, who are in the relegation zone with only 2 games left to play. A far better goal difference than their fellow strugglers mean David Moyes' men can start preparing for another season the top flight. Michael Antonio, Thomas Sack and Declan Rice posted goals for Hammers. Troy Deeney's second-half strike went in vain as the defeat left the visitors 3 points clear of the drop zone. The Hornets take on Manchester City and Arsenal in the remaining 2 games of the season as the relegation remains a distinct possibility. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.